This is Anarchast.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. We have coming in from Stockholm, Sweden, Susanne Tarkowski Tempelhof. She's a very interesting person. She's from Sweden. She ended up working in some war zones. We'll hear all about that. She was actually on TED Talks, and she's an anarchist. So I really want to hear how she managed to sneak onto the very liberal style TED Talks in Sweden. And but the first question I always ask everyone, Suzanne, is how did you become an anarchist?
It was actually a very long route to anarchism. I'm closing into my 30s now. In fact, I'm getting 30 this month. And, you know, I can honestly tell you it took me about 30 years to become an anarchist, frankly. I started out, like, my parents were really hardline, well, I wouldn't say communist exactly, but very, very, very far to the left. So I grew up with that. And in Sweden, which at the time was extraordinarily socialist. So, you know, I was sort of brainwashed into being like a communist socialist, whatever. And then I sort of started my own companies, and I started questioning things, and I became sort of more of middle of the road liberal and more of middle of the road conservative. And then I was always concerned about terrorism and stuff like that. And then eventually I headed off to war zones fighting for the US military, you know, sort of strange turn of events. And I became like a hardline neocon, neocon conservative. And I was that for a number of years, actually, until very recently, in fact. And, you know, so I don't know, like I was always like, since the age of like, in my early 20s, I started reading like Nozick and stuff like that. I was interested in libertarian thoughts, but I never really pursued it in a serious manner. And then when I was in various war zones, on one hand, I became a lot more neocon because I was sort of in the machinery of it, the whole thing. And on the other hand, I also became a lot more anarchist because I was actually living de facto in anarchist communities, which made me actually realize the virtue of anarchism. And
You're talking about Afghanistan?
yeah, Afghanistan and Libya. I mean, Afghanistan was sort of an anarchist community, you know, in the sense that there is a government in Afghanistan, and they do implement a degree of law enforcement. You know, there is a degree of government services in Afghanistan. It's not a anarchist country per se, but still, you know, I mean, first of all, if you look at the sort of the Muslim social construct, it is a social-centric sort of construct that is not really, you know, that doesn't really rely on a state. It relies on families and tribes and so forth, you know. And then in one village there will be, you know, some people who will, you know, abide to Pashto wadi above the law, you know, which is the sort of Pashto cultural code, or they will abide to the Hazara cultural code or whatever. So it is sort of anarcho-capitalism in action, actually, you know, in a way. And then the government sort of comes in and try to impose one fits all type of measure, right? And it doesn't work out, obviously. But when you are in that setting, I mean, I relied on these people. You know, I came in as a complete foreigner without any knowledge or actual interest in Afghanistan. And they took me in as family, and they, like, I mean, they saved my life multiple times over, you know, to a greater extent I would never have expected anyone in the West world to do, just because they had this amazing sense of community that comes from not having a government, actually.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Afghanistan, because it just goes to show how the media skews everything to however they want it. Because when the Soviet Union first invaded Afghanistan, that was after Britain tried. I remember it was
yeah, it's like the tunnel playground, right?
Yeah, like I think it was Rambo 2 or something, where he went to Afghanistan to fight for the free people.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fighting for the free, great, wonderful people of Afghanistan. And a few decades later, no, they're evil. We have to kill them all and make them into democracy. And it's just unbelievable. And in a sense, I guess, we should be almost rooting for the Afghanis just to not let outside political forces change their lives. Now, of course, in Afghanistan, there's a lot of problems. Obviously, there's a lot of religious-related problems and a lot of cultural things that just aren't that great about how they treat women and stuff like that. But you don't go in with bombs.
Right? By the end of the day, right? I mean,
What's that?
It's their choice, though.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be people coming in with guns.
Have the moral high ground on how they should live their lives, right?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. I'm just sort of, I know some of the comments below will go, oh, they do this to women. It's like, well,
yeah.
Sure. If you want to go there on your own and try to change it, go right ahead. But don't go in there with a giant military and start bombing everybody. That's not going to solve anything. But that's the only thing the U.S. government ever does. So.
I agree. I used to be, I told you, I used to be a neocon. I was pro-intervention, actually. I was pro... I wouldn't go as far as saying I was pro the Iraq intervention. I was always sort of like slightly skeptical about that. But I was definitely pro the Afghanistan intervention. And when you go there, you can't not be for it because it's sort of like they build schools. They throw a lot of money around. They do stuff, which is nice. But, by the end of the day, they're still occupying a country, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not good at all. And, the U.S. government is slowly, the internet's changing everything. They tried to do the same thing in Syria recently, and everyone just ignored them, and they just went away. And now, a few weeks later, they just can't even open up a zoo or a museum because they're out of money. There's all this crazy stuff these governments do and try to get people to support them in all their crazy things they want to do.
You're referring to the panda, to the panda camera, yeah.
Yeah. So you were in Afghanistan with the Swedish army?
No. I went there totally on my own, and I started working for the US military.
You just flew to Kabul?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And then you just started, what did you do? You just looked around and said to some US military people, hey, I want to fight?
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
Wow.
I was a graphic designer in Gothenburg, and I was like bored to death, right? And I wanted to get into politics, and then I knew a guy in Afghanistan. He had like met an Afghan taxi driver in Sweden, and he had somehow convinced him to go to Afghanistan and start a company with him. And then he sent me like a request for proposal, which is request for
you became like a contractor.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Oh, okay.
About like to rebrand entire national Afghan army and army and police force. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, And then it was like under the psychological operations thing, so I Googled psychological operations. I was like, wow, that sounds really sexy. And so it's like, yeah, why not give it a shot, right?
Well, good for you.
So I went to Afghanistan, and I ran into some people working with the US military, and I was like, oh, well, hey, I'm a graphic designer, and they were like, oh, well, actually, we need a art director to do like all the Osama bin Laden and wanted posters and stuff. So I said, okay.
Wanted posters.
Yeah. So I produced like all the like Osama bin Laden wanted posters, and we dropped it in like helicopters all over the borders and stuff.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Well,
after a while I just figured out like, hey, if I just sort of sign out of this shit, I can do my own thing and make much more money, So I quit and I started my own company, obviously, And so I started my own company, and then like the first 2 years I racked up like $7.4 million worth of contracts.
Really?
And like 300 employees, and I sold the company after 2 years. So I was like, oh well, that was easy enough.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? So I was really happy with the government, It was government for the win. Let's do more wars.
Yeah, that's what happens with all these contractors, Blackwater and Halliburton. They really, hey, this is great. We can make a lot of money. Let's do some more wars.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I mean, you get into this sort of, I have a favorite expression in life, which is a social science expression. I don't know who said it, but it's common in social science circles. And it basically says like behavior will change perception more than perception will change behavior, which is actually really profound if you think about it. Because it essentially says that I can know that it's dangerous to smoke, but that won't stop me from smoking. But if I do stop smoking, I will inherently think it's dangerous to smoke because I will always find a way to excuse my own behavior, right? It's sort of like the Stockholm syndrome gone global, which is particularly fun to say because I am in Stockholm actually. Um, so, when you are in the sort of like the drama of war, you get so drawn into it. So you think everything you do is right, you know? Like when I was there, when I worked with the military, I never doubted what I did for a second, you know? And it took me like a year out of it to actually come to terms with things and like start to question things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting story. So, what are you up to
But
now?
then the Arab Spring started.
Sorry?
Then the Arab Spring started.
Uh-huh.
Just when I thought I was pulling out for good, and I was retiring, the Arab Spring started, of course.
They draw you right back in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So suddenly I was in fucking Libya during the revolution.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. You've seen
In the
some
Civil
things.
War, yeah. I was like, bloody hell, how did I end up here,
Well, you're like, what do they call those people? Like a hired gun, like a mercenary. You just
Yeah,
drop into these places and
actually, yeah.
so
Yeah.
now you've seen all that, and now you've realized that anarchy is is a great philosophy, and you're against the state. Um, and I hear you writing a book now about these topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but before talking about the book, actually, Libya was sort of the thing that finally made me go into anarchy.
Oh, okay.
Because when I came there, there was a government, it wasn't the rebel territories of Libya, but the government were like 10 guys who were hiding out in a basement, and they were switching basements every evening to not get targeted. And their one and only role was speaking to foreign media. They had no actually like governance role, right? So
Huh.
it was de facto anarchy, even though there was like a so-called government, but there really wasn't. And it was amazing. I was just mesmerized by how well the society functioned without a government. There were like 200 people who were just assigned to collecting rubbish every night, like garbage, doing garbage collection. And there were engineers working for free 24/7s to keep the phone systems alive. There were like the Boy Scouts, the traffic policing. It was actually like a really well-functioning anarchist society. And this is not like a small town. Benghazi is a town of nearly the same size as DC. It's actually it's not insignificant. We're not talking about a village, we're talking about the actual town. So, just I was just mesmerized to see how well anarchy actually functioned. And I think that was sort of the final thing that made me become an anarchist.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I've sort of come across it a little bit different. I haven't been in war zones, but I've lived all over the world. I'm currently in Acapulco, Mexico, which is quite close to anarchy, really. There is government, unfortunately, and there is police, but they don't really do much down here. No one pays them much attention. So I've lived in Thailand, all over the place, and there is a government, there is police, but they really don't do much, and it's pretty much just anarchy for the most part, except for there is some government, police, and things like that. But it works very well, and there's places.
Right.
I've been
But
in
you can sit
China.
down with the police and negotiate with them. I mean, it's rather than the police, I would call them like village elders, They have more of a sort of social settlement function rather than a, legal implementation function.
Yeah, and then you have
Which is much better as a system, frankly.
Oh, definitely. Having a monopoly on force paid for through stolen funds called taxes is definitely not a good system. I can't believe people still believe in these kind of systems. It's so medieval. And then even more medieval is once this monopoly, and they throw people in cages for nothing, victimless crimes, which means it isn't a crime, and they put them in a cage, like a dungeon. Like, that is so medieval. I can't believe people in the 21st century still think this is something that we should be doing. It's absolutely insane.
It's bestiality.
Yeah, like I was giving an example the other day to someone. I said, if there was no police and there was no government and someone robbed you, let's say he robbed you on the street and you somehow got him, would you take him to your house and build a cage and keep him there for a year and pay for him to eat for a year and have a security guard and pay for a security guard to stand over him for a year and then just let him out? No, of course you wouldn't. You'd just say, give me my money back and I want some restitution for my trouble and for the pain I received or whatever, the stress, and pay me back. That's a much better way. This is an absolutely insane idea, having jails for people, except for the most, the 0.1% who are completely insane and actually sociopathic murderers. But other than that, for any sort of non-violence or something like a robbery or a theft or something like that, where no one got hurt, it's just crazy to do it that way. You'd want to get the money back.
In most cases, things can be peacefully arbitrated. There are exceptions when, as you just mentioned, when there are actual psychopaths offense, and that's not an easy thing to solve. I mean, I think that's the one greatest challenge for the, when people say like, how are you going to do that and how are you going to do that, and they sort of get down on every inch of anarcho-capitalism, until they come down to the very heart of it. And that is actually the very heart of it, the legal system, right? And, and the truth is, it's not utopia. There are no perfect answers, yes. Some criminals may go free, and we won't be able to do anything about it, just like today.
And not to mention,
it's far from perfect, and legal system in anarcho-capitalism will be far from perfect too.
And not to mention, this whole system creates these very small percentage of very violent people from time to time. If you look at any of those sort of people who have gone and murdered dozens of people, serial killers, if you actually look into their family life was destroyed, mostly because their family was broke or their dad was in jail for some victimless crime. He didn't have a dad, and then he's put into this prison system for kids called schools, and he's forced to sit there for 12 years, and then he's driving down the street, and he has to watch and make sure he doesn't drive too slow or too fast, or he'll get accosted and his money taken away from him. This system creates these kind of people. If we had a much freer system...
Exactly. I mean, along exactly the same line, sorry to interrupt you. But,
yeah, no problem.
I mean, the government have an unprecedented level of authority of our lives. That have never been the case before in history. They may have been horrible dictators, or kings, or whatever, who have killed and tortured people and extorted them and so on, but they have not decided the size of their soda. They have not had this unprecedented level of intrusion into our lives, and it just makes people go insane, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, forget about taxes, forget about wars. It's just about the exceptional amount of dumb, you know, intrusions into people's private life. And that's what I sort of was astonishing in war zones, actually, that in societies where you have little to no government, people actually step up to the task, families keep together, friends keep together, there is a degree of loyalty you won't find anywhere else in the world, really, because there is no government to resort to. And that's what I found amazing with anarchism, the degree of actually human interaction.
Yeah,
The degree of collectivism in a way, you know.
yeah, it's really interesting because like even in the U.S., you see someone and he'll be hurt, like say he got hit by a car or something, and no one will even go over and like help him much. They'll all just get on their phones and call the government, because the whole system is if they even touch the guy, he can sue them if they did something that maybe he said injured him more or something like that. So they have all these laws, and it keeps everyone else separated, and people just they don't know how to actually deal with actual real life situations anymore. I even had my own mother who she was living in a apartment. And I went over and I heard this dog yapping. It was some small dog next door. And she said, "That dog drives me nuts. He's yapping all day and all night." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "I'm going to call the town council or something." And I was like, "Why don't you just go next door and talk to her?" And sort of,
Yeah,
your
I know,
dog's
right?
yapping a lot. Is there anything I can do to help?
Think to delegate everything to a bizarre, unknown, bureaucratic entity, you know?
Yeah, it just takes away all the humanity out of life, and it creates
Precisely.
this very violent system where we're going to use force and go in, and it's like, just talk to people.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, so that's life that we live in. You live in Sweden. That must be interesting now that you're an anarchist to see the Sweden-style government.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I mean, obviously I interact with the entire sort of right-wing community here. And all told me, they're sort of like, you're out libertarian to every libertarian in Sweden, which I think is sort of a compliment.
Oh, it's definitely a compliment, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the
You're
fact
the
is
least
that,
violent person in the room.
yeah, I mean, the fact is that, I mean, don't dismiss Sweden so quickly, though, because it actually has changed a lot. We had a Republican government for the last 8 years, or Republican, like, sort of middle right government. And it actually improved quite a lot. Like, we privatized a ton of stuff, we decreased taxes, so it's heading in the right direction. But it's still a very socialist country by the end of the day. Um, but I think outside of the Anglo-Saxon world, actually Sweden may be the biggest libertarian community in the world, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually had one other person on from Sweden on Anarchast, so there's two of you at least.
Which one was the other one?
Klaus Bernpainter?
I
I don't know
think
if you
he's
saw that.
Finnish.
Oh, I could have sworn it was Sweden, but that was a long time
He's
ago. I don't
from
remember.
Sweden, I think. You know,
I could have
he
sworn it
claims
was
that
Sweden.
I think I met him. I think I know who you mean, but he's a full Swede. He's not actually Swedish. He's Finnish. Huh?
Oh, okay.
But the Swedish upper class always claim that the Finnish upper class always claim that they're Swedish because there was occupation for a long time. So all the upper class, are Swedish, essentially.
Ah, interesting.
It's like all colonialists. So yeah, I mean, when you meet a Finnish person who claims to be a libertarian, he's probably a Swedish person.
Interesting. That's funny that you've actually met him. That's how small this world is.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the same person, but I can imagine it would be, yeah. I mean,
Probably.
it's a very small circle, so yeah, it wouldn't be. Um,
So you went on TED Talks in Sweden, and actually you've introduced me to them, and we'll see if I can get on there. That'd be pretty hilarious. And I'll definitely leave the audience pretty silent at the end of it, I think, if they're liberal. And unless they are actually a libertarian audience, I don't know. What was the audience like there?
well, let me just put it like this. Like, the most hilarious comment I got out of my TED Talks was, like, a friend of mine was following the Twitter feeds, right? And while I was doing the TED Talk, and she posted it on Facebook, obviously. And it was like this Twitter feed saying, there's a raging libertarian on stage, run for your life. And I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. What did you talk about? I know the title was something governance brought. I forget what the title was. Something about govern yourself, to be governed by.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, my sort of libertarian premise, India for better words, is that, like a lot of libertarian thinkers, like Rothbard or Tucker, or even if we go to as far back as Nozick, who isn't really an anarchist thinker, but still, they all sort of part from the premise that we can create options to the nation state, but in a sort of very secluded way, right? And like, we're gonna have a company doing arbitration, we're gonna have 5 companies doing firefighting, we're gonna have blah 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 company doing arbitration, law enforcement, whatever, and I think that's a fine thought that I'm behind, and that initially brought me into to this realm of ideas, right? But I'm for it in all means. But I just think we need to have sort of an aggregated concept. Like, I am a lazy person, when I travel, I don't like to go to a hostel and figure out, where the cheapest meal is to be had. I like to go to a 5-star hotel and have everything figured out, right? Or when I buy a computer, I don't like to build my own PC. I want to buy a laptop and have everything installed at the outset, And I think most of humanity operates like that, right? We like things simple and done for us, and that's sort of how I see governments. I see it in a competitive way where there should be governance services. We do need governance services. We do need arbitration. We need jurisdictions. We need law enforcement. We need all of those things, but not in a monopolistic fashion. And it should all be aggregated into a service that's easy to use. In the same way we buy a laptop, or in the same way we, go on Facebook and we choose Facebook as our preferred platform, right?
No, I agree, and actually, I think that's a big opportunity for anarchists out there, and I hear that from a lot of anarchists. A lot of them seem to be broke, and I'm like, how can you be broke? There's so many things that you can be doing out
I
there
know,
that are
right?
needed services.
There are so many opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, like you look at in Detroit, they have a number of private security sort of policing services, and they're doing phenomenally well. And there still is somewhat of a government there in Detroit. There's definitely still a federal government, but you can always sort of start up these competing enterprises. It's not going to be necessarily easy at first, because first of all, all of your clients are already getting robbed for that money that they should be paying you in the first place by the government. So they're in essence paying twice. But you're seeing it all over now, especially in the U.S., as all these governments start to collapse. In Oakland, there's numerous private security sort of law enforcement agencies, same in Detroit, and they're doing very well. So start up competing industries with the government, and as the governments start to collapse, and it will happen in the U.S., you'll be perfectly primed to take over most of that business. And plus, you also start to show people how it could work when it's not just a monopoly, when it's not just a government forced service that is actually taking stolen money to pay for it. And people very quickly, and thanks to the internet, they start to catch on that this is a much better way to go about things. I live here in Mexico, and almost every single service you can imagine, including water and all kinds of things, they're all private. We get private water deliveries here.
That's how I lived for most of my life as well.
Yeah, and it works great. And there's competing ones. So if someone doesn't do a good job, you fire them, and
Yeah.
and
What's not to like?
oh, it's great. And I think the world's moving more in that direction, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. So, in your what's your book going to be about?
Well, it's about that, essentially.
Great.
I mean, as I said, there have been a lot of books about anarcho-capitalism, that what I feel is sort of that most anarcho-capitalist writers, or let's just keep it simple, let's just say anarchist, because at this point I can't really say a difference between anarcho-capitalist and anarchist. Um, but when I say anarchist, I mean right-wing anarchists, obviously. Um, and they are sort of they spend 99% of the time going against the government, which I think, I mean, I understand that entire narrative, and I understand where they're coming from, and I share their feelings to a great extent. However, I don't think that's a productive way to go ahead. So my sort of stance on it is slightly different. Have you ever heard of the expression like "kill them by kindness"?
No, I've never heard that.
All right.
Oh, killed them by kindness. Sorry, I thought you said Cain or something. Sorry, the connection's a little
No,
bad. Yeah, killing them by kindness. Yes, of course.
yeah. I mean, I think we as anarchist community, rather than ranting about what's bad with the government, we have to rant, if you like, about what's good with our solution, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so to that end, if you look at other anarcho-capitalist writers, which may be a repetition of what I said before, but they are all providing, well, essentially options to be independent, but it's usually confusing options. It's sort of saying like you live in a building and you have like 5 different firefighters companies to call. Who will you call? There are like anyone could obviously oppose to that picture because it's just not compatible with reality. Nobody would have want to have their house on fire and sit with a phone book of like 10 different right
Oh, yeah, definitely.
yeah. I mean that's just not a good option, right? And so this is what I'm trying to solve, like how we can essentially aggregate services of private owned government services into a private owned entity and multiple competing private owned entity.
That's an interesting concept. I've never heard that before. Yeah, and I agree with you. And part of
Well, you're
if we
sort of doing the same thing in those goals, but you're doing it in a geographical way. I'm doing it in a non-geographical way, but it's essentially the same idea, though.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think part of if we want to live in a free world, people have to take a certain amount of responsibility for themselves. And I think that's why
Right,
government is still
obviously,
around because people just don't want to have to look after themselves. They don't want to have to think about it. They'll just pay their taxes and hope the government takes care of it. So definitely a part of being in a more free world is taking responsibility, just like what you saw in Libya. There was a lot of trash and there's no one to pick it up, so they had to actually figure it out, and it takes a little bit of time sometimes, but they had to actually just get it done. But I think once the government, if we can get it more out of the way and get the taxes down dramatically, if not to zero, which would be perfect, that there'd be a lot more wealth around, and that people
right.
would.
I mean, we have to work from inside and outside at the same
Yes.
time. Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't know if
And
you.
also, I mean, when a lot of libertarians are sort of like, um, you can't work with the government. That's bad. That's blah blah blah. And I sort of agree. I see where they're coming from, and I actually do agree on a theoretical level. Yes, we should not work with the government. Yeah, it's a monopoly on force. It's a extortion racket. It's a mafia. But at the same time, we have to. I mean, we should just unite as libertarians. Regardless if we're minarchists or anarcho-capitalists or anarchists or whatever we are, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is we still have governments, and we're probably still going to have governments for a while. So yeah, we have to work with minarchists and even conservatives, and just try
Yeah,
to get government smaller and smaller over time until
exactly.
eventually it's just gone. Hopefully. So yeah, I'm with you on that one, and
We
not
have to
being
be
too.
pragmatic, right?
Sorry.
We have to be pragmatic by the end of the
Oh,
day.
definitely. Yeah. There's we don't know how this is all going to turn out, and there's going to be a lot of different angles that will probably help us along the way. And even, we could even bring liberals on our side. Like the liberals, a lot of them, they believe in a lot of
yeah.
these. Yeah, like a lot of them believe in a lot of things that we do. They're like, I want to smoke whatever drugs I want.
Right.
Don't tell me what to do with my body, all this kind of stuff. And
I mean,
so
that's
we can
like
attack them on that side, or not attack, but like join with them on that side, and then
the libertarian left is huge. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think it's
actually,
an oxymoron personally, but it's huge.
well, I was at Porkfest in New Hampshire recently, and I couldn't believe how many hippies were there. And there was drum circles, everyone's smoking pot, and they're all talking about love, man, and all that kind of stuff. And I started talking to them. I'm like, "You're an anarchist?" They're like, "Yeah, man. I was just sitting there one day smoking and thinking about peace and love, and I thought, they're right, man. The government is violence. We need the non-aggression principle." So maybe we'll get a lot of them from that side. Who knows?
I know.
Great. More the better.
I think it's astonishing as well, I mean, I came from the uber right-wing side of it, but I welcome every contribution. And even, I had like, when I was sort of going through the transition phase of, like, I was attracted to anarchism. I understood the anarchist principles and libertarian principles. But I had like some libertarians, like, who were constantly bothering me, being like, "You are the great devil because you work for the US government," which was sort of true. But I'm just thinking, like, if they wouldn't have been so aggressive towards me at that time, I would probably have become an anarchist like 2 years earlier, Seriously. If they would just have
Yeah.
been nice and said, like, "Hey, kid, you have some interesting thoughts going on, but maybe you're not aware of this source of reference, and maybe you should check this out." It
Oh,
would have
I definitely
brought me
agree
over
that,
a lot quicker, actually.
yeah, well, you get a lot more bees with honey than with, I forget what the rest of that saying is, but yeah, definitely,
Right.
it does no good to really attack people. It does more good to try to find the areas in which you do agree, and then to try to slowly, calmly, peacefully just question some of their beliefs, and just give them very good responses to it and let them think about it rather than saying, "You're wrong." That just makes people withdraw from the conversation.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we're a small community at the outset. Alienating people is not the way to go.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
should just embrace everybody who have some sort of liberty leaning,
Mm.
however shallow it may be. And then sort of through kindness lead them to the right direction.
That's an excellent point, and I think that's a great way to end this interview with talking about how we should be more kind to the non-anarchists out there, and through that we can hopefully attract more people to understanding the ideas we're talking about here. So I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to talk about, Susan?
Yeah, I haven't even had a chance to promote my book yet.
Oh, yes, please do.
Yeah. All right. So my book is about precisely that, in fact. No, not
Great.
precisely that, in fact. But essentially, it's about, I mean, it's about agorism, agorism solutions. But instead of saying like, "Oh, we have a currency here, we have, a private arbitration function here," we should try to make it easy for people, and we should put it in a sort of globalization context, so which make it obvious for people that not only is it the easiest choice, it's the only choice, because that's where the world is heading anyways. Um, and so essentially, I'm just saying, we as anarchists, or whatever label you want to put on to it, voluntarist, whatever, um, we should unite to try to create services that make it easier for people. All honor to the Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and blah, blah, blah. But really, we have to make it mainstream at this point. We should target the mainstream, and we should make it easier for the mainstream to operate.
Oh, I definitely agree. I can't wait till your book comes out. Do you have any date in mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, the official date is February 2014. But that being said, I push it up like 3 times before. So, like, don't, you know, don't put the last dollar on it, right?
No, I understand. I've been working on a book for a few years now, so that I thought was going to take a month. So
I know, right? That's exactly my problem. Yeah.
it's not as easy as it looks. Well, that's great.
Look at it though. I mean, Ayn Rand spent like what, 4 years on writing Atlas Shrugged?
I think she took like a year just to write that one speech.
Right. I mean, even if she didn't make any money off it, but who cares, right? I mean, after her death, it sold like tons. I prefer to spend even 2 years more writing a book and making it a really fucking good book, rather than like pushing something out really quickly and being sort of half baked, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're running out of time, so I'd like to thank you, Susan, for being on Anarchast from Sweden. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me, darling.
It's my pleasure. So that's another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.